when Sam Brownback was introduced, he started off by saying, you know, the last time Barack Obama and I were on the same stage, we were speaking before the NAACP. And not surprisingly, they were more excited to see him than they were to see me. And then he turned to Obama and said, "You're in my house now." Barack Obama, when he got up to make his comments, said, "Well, all due respect to Sam, this is my house too," and got a standing ovation for that, which tells you a lot about what's changed over the last just very few years since 2004. The fact that Democrats do consider churches and religion in general their house too. And I think that's provided an opening and some more options for a lot of religious voters who are kind of siding by default with Republicans. In terms of the question, it's often posed as, is the religious right dead? And as someone who works for a magazine that published a cover in the 1960s saying, "Is God dead?" And I would note that the location of the verb in that statement is very important. It's often said, Time magazine declared God dead. But we need to be very careful about making blanket statements. One of the most favorite storylines, I think, for news publications is to declare the religious right either on the rise or on the wane. It's usually somewhere in the middle. While this may be a different era for the religious right, I think it would be dangerous to declare that religious conservatives are no longer influential in politics, and that we won't be seeing the type of politics that we've gotten used to over the last few decades for a long time. For one thing, I think you can point to leaders like Tony Perkins with the Family Research Council and say that, yes, we have kind of a new, younger generation of leaders in the evangelical community, Warren, Joel Hunter, Bruce Isaac. Somebody like Tony Perkins is absolutely in the mold of what we think of as the religious right, and his organization will continue to be fairly powerful in terms of setting the agenda on the right. Institutions like the Moral Majority and the Christian Coalition have been in decline for a long, long time now. It's just that right now journalists are catching up to that and realizing that, in fact, the Christian Coalition has not had the sway that they were ascribing to it for quite some time now. But that doesn't mean that they're not being replaced by other institutions. And as someone who's just spent the last 3 or 4 weeks on right-wing talk radio talking about my book, I can definitely tell you that religious conservatives have not disappeared. And it is certainly not the case that all evangelicals have seen the light and decided that the environment and government intervention and poverty efforts and AIDS and Africa are the #1 issues that they should be behind. I think we're going to still have a fairly powerful block of voters and block of leaders in the public square, keeping the focus on what we've come to think of as the cultural war issues. Those are not going away anytime now. However, we don't have to declare the religious right dead in order to see a development of the evangelical center. I think the two of those can coexist at the same time. And absolutely, as EJ pointed out, we've seen quite a shift, even in just the last 3 or 4 years there. In terms of party identification, evangelicals, I think, are realizing that they do not want to be taken for granted by the Republican Party, but neither do they want to be taken for granted by Democrats either. In 2004, right after the election, about 50% of white evangelicals were registered Republicans. Now that number is down to 40%, which is still a large percentage, but it's a significant drop in just 3.5 years. When you look at younger generations, that's driven even further. We did a time poll of under 30 voters about a month and a half ago and found that 35% of under 30 voters in the Democratic Party are evangelicals, and 35% of independent voters under 30 are also evangelicals. And we can get into some of that in further discussion. I don't want to take up a lot of time now about why that has changed. But that definitely is a shift that will have impact over the next few years. We don't know whether those younger evangelicals will end up having an influence on their older peers. But we do know that they're becoming more involved in politics, that firstly, and that while they may not be any less pro-life than older evangelicals, they're demanding that the plate of issues that be on the agenda be broadened, that in addition to things like abortion and to a lesser extent pre-younger evangelicals, gay marriage, that poverty and the environment and opposition to torture and calling into question the war in Iraq, that all of these things deserve their focus as well.